Working. Oh, am I unmuted now? Guys, I apologize. I am having heck logging into this meeting. And I don't know why I can't let myself into the meeting on my computer. So if you will bear with me a minute, I'm going to try to get this figured out. Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, sounds good. Give me just a minute. I'm trying to figure out why I can't get my computer logged into the meeting.
Eric, you're becoming quite the superstar.
What's that?
Oh, I've been listening. I re-listened to some of those interview that John did with you. I didn't get down to the Alabama, but I heard it was fun.
Yeah, missed you guys down there. It was.
Yeah, we had a conflict of events. You can only go around, so you got to be home sometimes.
No, I hear you. Well, that was a very good place to be in that time of the year.
Recording in progress.
Yeah, we haven't gotten winter until today. We're gonna get it tonight, I guess.
Yeah, we're like at 80 degrees right now in BC.
80?
Yeah, well, that's I estimated 20 degrees Celsius.
Oh, well, yeah. No, we were like 15 this morning. We're supposed to get a boatload of snow. I'll take every bit we can get. We're so dry. We haven't had moisture since this. We had some rain right before Christmas, and that was it.
Yeah, same with us. Super dry.
So
it's gonna be an interesting summer.
Yeah, trying to figure out what a guy should buy.
Exactly.
It's been a nice contrast to last winter, though, from a weather standpoint. So,
well, you guys have gotten some moisture out there, haven't you, John?
Mostly south of us. We've gotten a little bit, but like when we go skiing, it's rocks and brush and grass that we're skiing on. So,
oof.
Yep, pretty fun. Cool. Well, it's good to see you guys. Sorry that I was slow. I don't know what in the world happened. Somehow I could not get myself to be the host and let myself into the meeting. So now I am the host and I am in the meeting. So good to see all of you. Let's go ahead and get started. Looks like people are still coming in. Let's see. I'm going to keep letting people in as we go. Today we are going to talk about transfers.
Oh,
no. And I am going to start sharing my screen.
No.
I've been thinking about titles lately and how to make them more interesting. So hopefully you can see my screen. Can you see my screen now? Somebody nod.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Awesome. All right. So here's what we're going to talk about today. When we have been talking about gross product. And those of you that have been to the Ranching for Profit School, I hope have a pretty good grasp of what gross product is. At least introductorily so. I've told a number of you that the more I work with gross product and over the years and in the current situation, the more I think it is an incredibly powerful set of it's an incredibly powerful number, if you will, as a sum. It's an incredibly powerful process, but it also has a tremendous amount of complexity. And I really want to make sure the reason why we're kind of going through gross product for a few months here, line by line, is I really want to make sure we understand the level of complexity and the impact of it. Because there are, 5 or 6 potentially moving parts within a gross product, we may get to the end of a season or the end of a year and say, well, our gross margin percentage was bad, as we talked about last month or last webinar. That might be because of our direct costs. That might be because of our gross product. When we evaluate our gross product, there are a lot of factors that influence that. We talked about inventory last time. And with inventory covered, one of the other main pieces is effectively, the sale or production side of the enterprise. And when we talk about transfers, we are effectively talking about selling things to ourselves. So this is intercompany transfers or transfers between enterprises. I have seen a number of examples, and I want to conclude talking a little about this. I didn't include too many examples here today because I wanted to keep the math fairly simple, and I think the math demonstrates the concept. But I want to talk a little about specific examples where when we transfers and we do it, sort of wrong or unfairly, we can really lead our business down a bad path. So with that, any questions before we go deeper? Awesome. All right, we'll keep going. So take a look at these two enterprises here. Which one of these enterprises is working? Meaning which one is performing better? And I have only included the gross product and the asset turnover. I'm going to ask you to assume that these are, similar enough that the asset turnover number can be compared meaningfully.
Is this that place where you wait for awkward silence and someone to break that?
Yep, exactly, Jordan. Thank you for helping me.
So I'm gonna take a wild stab that Enterprise One is the one that's better working since asset turnover is high.
Sounds good. Quick show of hands or nod or whatever. How many of you would agree with Jordan and think, yeah, that seems reasonable? All right, awesome. Page 2. Whoa. Sorry, page. Did I get this right? Hang on one sec. Yep, page 2. Which enterprise is working better? And again, I'm willing to wait for an awkward silence. I've been meaning to get the Jeopardy soundtrack so I can play that during the awkward silences. I've tried to make these very comparable. So you'll notice a number of the numbers are the same.
Enterprise 2.
Anybody want to disagree? Agree with that? Disagree with that? Anybody want to argue? Come on, we love a good argument on these things. Is Wally here today? He is not, is he?
No.
Confusing
too
us
bad.
with in a different format than we're used to.
Well, okay, that may be true, Daniel. That's fair. Yeah, all right. But again, this is, and I should have reviewed this first, but we're going to get to this in a minute. But this is the calculation for gross product, correct, Jordan? Where we start with an opening inventory, we end with a closing inventory, and then we add sales, we subtract purchases, we add transfers out, we we subtract transfers in. And yes, Daniel, we usually do the transfers in and out on the same line. All right, now I want to show you how I got to these two different sets of numbers. This is a 500 cow herd that in this particular example, although this could be one of many things, these are literally real examples I have seen. Not picking on anybody, it's been adjusted, cleaned up. It's an even 500 head, for example, but the concept stays the same. We take a 500 cow herd. The inventory is worth $1 million. We left it exactly stable so that it was the same for opening and closing. The only difference between these, we have the same replacement rate between scenario 1 and scenario 2. Okay, the only difference is the value of the transfers. And when I give you this spreadsheet, what I want you to see is the label here, which is in this first scenario, I gave you, oops, I'm sorry. The first scenario, I gave you a market value transfer. And in the second scenario, I gave you a cost transfer. I'm always terrified when I put these up that I'm going to get the numbers wrong and it's going to take away from the point. I promise you the point is valid even if I've screwed up the arithmetic. People, when do people do this? And why? And I started the talk off with, you know, how much are you willing to lie? The whole point of what we try to do with financials, you can lie in financials. Anybody that tells you you can't is lying, which makes it pretty easy. And by lie, I don't mean necessarily, you know, do something that is sort of dishonest in terms of tax or anything like that. But as far as describing how your enterprise is performed, there are a lot of choices you get to make. And while these two situations work out the same in the total category, because the literal sales are the same over the 2-year period, the willingness of us to be brutally honest with ourselves and to try to use this process to sort of counteract any tendency we might have to fool ourselves. Does that make sense? Yes, good. Any question about the numbers before we move on with the concept? Jordan, are you checking my arithmetic to make sure it's right?
I'm not checking arithmetic. I was just looking at the numbers.
Okay.
So like on the calves, where did you come up with $600 cost to raise a calf?
I just pulled that out of the air.
Okay, that's what I was curious. Because that would be like
you can make it 800. You can make it 800 if you want, right?
You still get the point across, right? Though
correct. Most of us, if I used James Kofelt's numbers and used $293 there, it would be even more skewed, right?
Correct. Yeah.
I don't know if any of you have seen James Kofelt, who's my like new best friend on Facebook. He is an incredibly he quotes Alan Nations a lot. He's got some fantastic stuff. Anyway, long story short, the idea is if you put those calves in at cost, it makes it reduces the income for your cow-calf enterprise, and it increases the income for your, the gross product, if you will. It increases the difference between the income and the cost on the stocker enterprise. So again, if I love the stocker enterprise and I'm kind of tempted to BS myself into proving that the stocker enterprise is the enterprise I should be in, I can make that happen. Conversely, if I love the cow-calf enterprise and I want to make it look good, I can also do that. The important thing again is that we are trying to put sort of checks in place to keep us from fooling ourselves. And this is why we get to using accurate or reasonably accurate market transfer numbers. Are our market transfer numbers correct? I guarantee you the answer is no. They are, oops, I'm sorry. What have I done here? They are always incorrect, right? We are always guessing. I'm sorry, I can't get my, we are always guessing. We are always sort of, estimating. We're never going to be right. But we can make significant and material changes that allow us to sort of push the business one way or the other. What would be some places? What are some types of businesses where we see this happen? Does anybody want to make some guesses? Jordan, I know you have a favorite that you love to pick on.
Which one?
Well, I'll give one example. I have seen some very large farm feedlot operations, for example, that put all the feed in at cost and essentially continue growing their farming operation without giving it any sort of market-based feedback. Okay, the thing the market does for us is provide feedback. What are other combinations of enterprise where we can do that? I gave you one that's cow-calf and stockers.
Direct to consumer.
And how would we fool ourselves there? Is this
Well,
Abby?
you'd be
Oh,
no,
Annalise.
it's lease.
I got
It's
you.
lease. Yeah, if you're selling back that heiferette that you put some weight on at cost that you bought it for, and you're not putting in your cost of gain or any like really charging yourself what it was worth or what you could sell it for as a live animal, you don't know if you're actually going to make the same amount of money on that direct consumer animal as stakes, and or like could you make more money selling it as a live animal on the open market? It's an opportunity question.
And sometimes this is the fun part about direct to consumer right now. I see people sort of get it really wrong both directions. So some people credit the, the stocker or even the cow calf enterprise, like, oh, we buy these calves for $5,000 because we can sell them for 6,000 on the cut up. Or we see other ones where they put them in, I think, like you're saying, at cost with no sort of correction for the production, that sort of thing. So you can make a direct to consumer enterprise look really good or really bad. And conversely, the live animal enterprise attached to it, obviously would be the converse. What else? This is where the music's supposed to play, Jordan.
I would assume an operation that puts up hay could do that.
Great example. Yeah, perfect, right? And I think that's probably a classic RFP example where we put the hay up at cost without accounting for a lot of the economic costs, and then feed it to cows way too cheaply. And even if we put it up at full cost and we have a full cost accounting for our operation, there is still a danger of not actually using the market value. So a couple of years ago in our part of the world, when hay was $300 a ton, like even if a full cost accounting says I can put it up for 75, you're still missing a massive economic opportunity.
And the interesting thing with hay, it goes the other way too, right? Like if you're feeding out that hay on your ground, like especially bale grazing, your livestock enterprise should be kicking something back to the farming operation, right? But we often don't. I mean, in theory we do that, but we don't actually. Very rarely do we put numbers down on paper.
Right, very good. And some of the cover crop people have gotten really good at thinking about this. Jim Garish's book, Kick the Hay Habit, has actual examples of, how many pounds of different nutrients are going back on the ground. He breaks it down into the, the main nutrients that we purchase, figures a market value for those, and then refigures the value of feeding. So great point, Eric. Really good. Anybody else? I'll go through just a couple off the top of my head. If you want to, please feel free to interrupt me. Replacement heifers are one place where we can do this. Seed stock is a place where we often see this. Direct to consumer was mentioned, cow, calf, and stockers. We talked about hay, but any of the farming enterprises. We can make corn look really good or really bad, depending on how we value it and what the market is. The point is, again, in all of these things, we are trying to protect ourselves from ourselves. Our ability to lie to ourselves and deceive ourselves is really high, like shockingly high. We all do it. And we are trying to come up with a way to not do it, or to do it significantly less. All right. Transfers, as I mentioned earlier, in a gross product work exactly like sales and purchases. And so again, they are either, you are either buying something too high or too low, or you are selling something too high or too low. And the nice thing is it's basically a 1-for-1, dollar value change depending on the enterprise that you're gaining or shorting. And when we talk about accrual accounting in this sense, I think that the change in inventory and the change in the inventory, the change in enterprise of that inventory. When the IRS talks about accrual accounting, they're often talking about, whether the check cleared on the 30th of December or the 3rd of January. If we're going to get into the real details of full accounting, I think cost transfer is a very, very important part of that within the enterprise. All right, this is I should have put this at the beginning, and I apologize. This is the definition of gross product. I want to go through a few things again that we talked about last time. Remember, we can do this different ways, but it is the closing inventory as a positive number, the sales is a positive number, transfers out of the enterprise is a positive number, And then the negatives are, or the costs, if you will, are transfers in, purchases, and opening inventory. I want to pay for transfers in and out or sell transfers in and out exactly as if they were sales. What the most common situation that we see is people say, oh, we sold our heifers for $1,400 a head, and we transferred the ones that were left for $800 a head. Now, that's a place where you have real market data, and I would be willing to bet that there is a price difference between the ones you sold and the ones you kept, right? Let's say you sold the top enders and kept the low enders, or the reverse, right? You kept the top enders and sold the low enders. I'm okay with there being a different value there, but there has to be at least some tie. A difference of $400, $500, $600 is usually cheating, right? You are literally not being honest with yourself. Danny's got a quick comment here. Danny, you want me to? Oops, hang on a minute. Danny, do you want me to share that? Where did it go? I'll wait to hear from you.
Yeah, John, I'm so sorry. We're at the dentist, so I had kept
Oh yeah,
myself on
you
mute.
told me that.
But yeah, so that's why I was messaging him. Yes, absolutely. Feel free to share. I don't know if I'm jumping in the right place because I missed a couple of the webinars. But yeah, kind of the idea that accounting for things that are going into the business that we often just kind of have been giving to the business, and so I'm not sure if I'm on the right track with that idea.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. And again, I think when we talk about this, we can all come up with examples of maybe where we've done it, maybe where we've seen somebody else do it, etc. Oh,
okay.
Yeah. No, I think your comment is exactly right. So you basically restated it. That's exactly
Okay.
what we're trying to do. Okay, now somehow I've got something out of order here. All right. Oftentimes, as we talked about last time, when we see problems with gross margin or asset turnover, we need to make sure that we are diving into all of the components of that. This is a system that has a lot of levers, and it can be very confusing. And I think most of us like to hold a single lever constant, right, and change around it. And we all know that in each of our businesses, that is never happening. First of all, your opening and closing inventory are never the same, right? Your sale price is never the same. The value is never the same, right? The demo I'm giving you is very simple because I've cheated, right, and adjusted a real world example to a fantasy. But when we see problems with gross margin, we want to make sure we're digging in on both sides. As I've said before, I think gross product is a vastly underlooked source of problems for people in their operations. We talked last time about this specific list about reasons we have a low gross product. It includes all of the things we talked about before: animal performance, marketing, markets, overvalued inventory, high replacement costs. But it can also be because we are literally either not recording or not recording correctly our transfers. The first, one of the very first customers we had with Ranch Right in 2021 came to me in tears after a Wally Olson school and said, we didn't make any money last year. We are going broke. And they couldn't pay their bills. And the reason was they had made a conversion from a cow-calf and, single enterprise cow-calf business to a direct consumer business. And they had not gotten to 30 months yet, right? So year one, they didn't sell any calves. So from a tech standpoint, for example, they didn't have any income. But from an economic standpoint, they had held all of the value of those calves by not including that transfer between enterprises from cow-calf into like a stalker or even a finisher enterprise, right? They had let their sort of cash flow dominate their economic thinking. We have to be thinking about both. They obviously were in a terrible cash crunch, but they were in a wonderful economic position because at that point, if you recall, in 2021, calf prices did go up some from the really low they had been in. And because when we added all of those calves, into their inventory and accounted correctly for the transfer, again, cash flow was still a problem, but they had a wonderful economic situation. Their balance sheet had improved. So that's just one very simple example. We see that sort of thing and have those conversations on a fairly regular basis. Again, the thing to remember is that usually the total will come out in the wash, but in a case like theirs where they were in the middle of the conversion, it was not coming out in the wash. It was going to come out in the wash, but it was going to take basically 3 years to get there. And when you're in the middle, that's where the real suffering happens in these conversions. When you convert to, it's hard to think about a slower turnover than cow calf, but going to, birth to plate direct to consumer is slower. And again, those periods went between 24 and 32 months and leading up to that are very difficult. Any questions or comments about that? Quiet crowd today. Jordan, you want to add anything?
No, I'll just reiterate the overvalued inventory or those. I mean, the fun thing about gross product is the truth will always come out, and you can put whatever value you want on your inventory, but that's eventually going to turn into a check that goes into the bank to you, and that's where the big difference comes out. So that's where, and that's why I also agree with market value too. We could argue, how do you calculate the cost of raising that animal or that ton of hay? Whereas the market's the market. That your regional market, it is what it is. So that's what, like you said, gross product has so many levers to pull on it.
Yep. Good. And I think I love Jordan's approach to this, and I think, Jordan, you speak about it more clearly than anyone, which is you can lie for a while, but eventually we're going to see what it actually sells for. And if you're telling us that you have, calves that are worth $5,000 and you turn around and sell them for 1,200, the two things they're going to have to resolve or reconcile at some point. Now the opposite is also true, right? If you're at the bank and you're using fully depreciated assets on your balance sheet and you're undervaluing all of your livestock, you might be painting a very negative, overly conservative picture of your operation. And I don't think that's a good idea either. We can get in trouble both ways. All right, now I want to get back to, and this is a bit of a review, but I want to get back to, in this example, I compared gross product to the underlying value of the asset base. So in our financials, the way we're structuring this now is that we maintain a separate balance sheet account for each enterprise for the most part. So your cow-calf, instead of lumping what might be similar assets together because of their economic status or their repayment or sort of lifetime, or their life cycle, maybe is a better way to say it. We are also subdividing them so they match with enterprises. And what we want to do is oftentimes you obviously can compare your gross product to your gross margin. That's great. But you often can compare it to the underlying asset. And again, this is a place where we see huge variation in the performance of the underlying asset. Most of you are familiar. I've talked, I think, with a number of times about the Kiyosaki ratio. I do want to go into that in more detail in a webinar. But how much of the money that you have piled up in your ranch, in your farm, is actually generating money? If you have most of your money tied up in fixed assets like buildings, for example, that you don't rent out or don't generate income, that makes your business relatively inefficient. If you have if you have all your money tied up in stuff that generates cash flow, then you have a very, efficient or powerful business. Wally and I met the other day. These numbers are not exact. His Kiyosaki ratio is the highest of anyone I've seen. Kiyosaki ratio is the number of cash flow producing assets divided by the number of non-cash flow producing assets. And basically he's, over 90% of his assets are producing cash flow. And I said that wrong. Excuse me. It is the number of cash flow producing assets divided by the total assets. We see lots of cases that are 50-50, right? Your cow herd is worth about the same amount as your tractors and trucks and four-wheelers and buildings and that sort of thing. When we get that number over 90%, right? Imagine you're Wally Olson and you own cows and a pickup truck, right? It's pretty easy to get that number way down. And again, that means that your money is actually doing more work. In the two cases I cited at the beginning, there's a range of variation in there. All of those numbers were most of those numbers were reasonably acceptable. But the idea that right now you can have a cow herd that generates more dollars than you have invested in the cow herd is hard for many people to conceive, but we're seeing it more frequently. In 2017, 2018, 2019, it was a little harder to do, but the similar strategy that allowed you that much higher asset turnover number generally worked in both markets. And again, as we often talk about with gross product, when I see a problem with gross product, it is almost always a lack of inventory focus, or excuse me, a lack of income focus and mismanagement of inventory. If we are owning and assets, frankly, if we are owning a lot of stuff that isn't producing return, our businesses do not work very well. This is one of the reasons we get in, when we talk about asset turnover, there's been a lot of discussion recently about buying real estate, some of those things. Real estate is a wonderful investment for people that can make the payment, or people that already have the money. But if you don't already have the money, then you need your assets to be generating cash on a very short time scale. Usually for asset turnover numbers, I annualize that number to make sure they are comparable. Any questions, problems with that? Thoughts?
I just have a quick question. So like, if the land is paid for, are you adding that into like the asset? Like, how are you calculating that into the, does that make sense?
Yeah. Great question. How do we do that? Anybody know? It's a highly related topic. You heard about it in the school.
And so if you have pieces that are generating cash flow and some pieces that aren't generating cash flow, does that go into that formula?
Absolutely does. And that's what we use opportunity rent for.
Oh, okay. That would make sense.
Right. So if you are paying yourself rent, even if you're not actually paying it, right? Or if you're paying it from the left hand and picking it up with the right hand, that is how we figure that in a real estate scenario.
How about just the appreciation? Like, like here, real estate's gone up so much in the last 3 years, but they are interested in selling it. So how are you valuing that? I mean, do you know what I mean?
Anna, you ask such good questions. All right. I'm gonna open this up. Who wants to take a strike at this one? And I'm gonna leave out your last comment about whether or not they're interested in selling it.
Okay.
Okay, so when I'm looking at the returns on real estate, am I looking at purely cash flow plus appreciation? How should I do that? Come on, Kean,
John, to me, I guess.
Oh, Grant, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. To me, if the business doesn't own the land, it's irrelevant whether the land is appreciating or not. But I guess if the business or the individual owns the land, I still, and I'm not an expert on this, I still would struggle to include that appreciation, because it's not affecting your. It's not going to write you a check, I guess. Maybe
Not
that's
affecting
wrong.
your ability to pay your bills, service the debt, that sort of thing.
Right.
Yep, that is one great answer of many potential. Yeah, very good. So Grant, in your case, for example, you own some property, right? And then you lease a bunch of property.
Right.
And the cash flow off the lease property supplements the income, even if the income is to yourself on the owned property, right? To be able to make the payments.
Yes.
Could you make the payments without that sort of supplemental acreage?
Probably not.
Right. And again, this is a thing that I think Alan Nation writes incredibly well about. He has strong recommendations about how much leased land you should pair with owned land in order to be able to make the payments and help the cash flow. Anybody else?
I think there's also an aspect of, actionable intelligence. Like you should be keeping track of both those things. But if you're not going to sell the land like next week, then why bother track a market appreciation? Right? You should be only interested in the cash flows that are generated by that underlying asset because that is going to impact you week to week or month to month. Now all of a sudden, if you're thinking about selling in the next year or a few years, then all of a sudden market appreciation becomes more interesting. But regardless, those two things need to be separate.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that the full spectrum of those answers that Grant and Eric gave is then the other end, which is if you are a land trader, and I know people that do that. They buy and sell land, and they do capture that appreciation. If you are willing to do that, then certainly add that to your calculation. The one thing I always caution people about, especially like after the last couple of years, is I would be very conservative with your estimate of what the actual, the realizable appreciation actually is. And one of those reasons is even if you sell the land for the dollar number that you think you're going to and capture a reasonable, capture that appreciation, there are a few other things waiting in the wings for you that probably need to be dealt with. And I think taxes is probably one of the most significant. Jordan, do you want to add to that? I know you have some thoughts on this topic.
No, I think, you hit the land trading there too. But if your ranch appreciates, it doesn't write you a check, but you can always refinance it too. Banks love appreciation. So,
and I forgot about that one. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's one where you can capture some cash out of that.
Yep, that's right.
So,
but as we've talked about before, I encourage you to be very, very careful with that because again, many banks will loan based on asset value, and you really want to borrow based on payment ability.
Right. Right.
And those two numbers can be wildly different.
Yeah.
Awesome.
One thing about
those are really good questions. Go ahead. What'd you say, Jordan? Or Stan?
Is it with paid for land that we have no intention of selling? We've been leaving it off because it's such a big number. It can skew ratios and stuff so badly that it can really you can fool yourself and have a problem, and it can hide some problems. Are we doing it incorrectly?
No, that's exactly right. And that's the reason with almost everybody we work with, we follow the ranching for profit recommendation that we leave land out entirely. And even if it's not a separate entity, we treat it as though it is. So in your case, you're exactly right? The land value would sort of blow everything up. Well, what's your asset return based on the, especially if you use the market, but even if you use the purchase price, it's very poor, right? You would make incredibly conservative decisions based on that. Yep. So I'm a big fan. When we're talking about land, I'm a big fan of leaving it out. But let's go back to a little more within the context of our original discussion. I am not, if you're a direct consumer business, I'm not leaving out the cow-calf enterprise, right? And I don't want any kind of unclear picture in this as far as what is going on. I've looked at a few examples over the last couple of years where and I'll use the ranch farm combined example again. Farm products are moved to the ranch at cost, and then effectively both of those enterprises were performing very badly. One looked like a rock star, right? The farm zeroed out. The feeding enterprise looked significantly good. It led them to continue increasing that, led to increased demand for farm products. The farm was drifting with no sort of back pressure, if you will, on costs. The farm continued to increase its productive capacity, like with cost as no object. Okay. And most of us understand the law of diminishing returns, right? As you spend more money, if your only metric on the farm is more production, not more production, per unit cost or some metric like that, then you walk yourself down this road where you're paying increasingly higher costs to increase production, but at an increasingly slow rate. And that took a case where a farm basically went on way too long in very, very marginal conditions. And a feeding enterprise that, you know, really was getting hammered on all the time of why isn't this working better? You know, what was really everything was underperforming in a lack of clarity. All right, I'm going to wrap that up there. Hopefully that I am happy to discuss whatever you would like. I think this is trying to keep our gross product webinars fairly short so they're useful on the internet. More questions, comments, thoughts?
One more I would add on the gross product there, your asset turnover ratio. You know, the only one we have in the RFP school is just the total business asset turnover ratio.
Correct. That's right.
And I like yours where you had that, you know, 80% or whatever. And I think this goes, maybe will help Hannah's question. But, you know, when you said 17, 18, and 19, it was actually harder. Well, maybe because in 17, 18, 19, we were selling $900 calves, but we probably only had $1,200 cows. So that's a 75% asset turnover ratio, right?
Well, but in those years, Jordan, I was buying calves for $600.
Okay, so that makes it worse.
Correct. You're right. That's exactly right.
And so now we're selling $1,500 to $1,700 calves, but we have to buy a $2,500 cow to do that.
Maybe.
So now my asset. So to me, that's why ratios are fun, is because if they both move up, the ratio doesn't change.
Right. So this is a fun place that I love to talk about strategy. In 2015, cows hit, like, you know, you could buy a bred cow, you could sell a bred cow for a good running age young cow for $3,000. Cull prices were not as strong as they are now, but you could buy an old cow for an old bred cow, like a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old cow for anywhere from $800 to $1,200. When we use the intrinsic value calculation between, you know, with those two extremes in mind, I spent a lot of time in the sale barn in 2015 buying 10-year-old cows because they produced the same $1,600 calf that the $3,000 cow did. And so this is where that asset turnover ratio gives us a lot of insight into where we might be looking for, you know, to move ourselves. What position in the market do we want to take? Eric, I think that would be an appropriate use of what strategy you're going to use. Is that correct? And then what tactics underneath that strategy?
Oh, well done, John.
Okay, thank you. If you missed Eric's strategy discussion in Alabama, you missed out. I'll just tell you that. More to come on that. But we'll but again, that's a place where right now I just saw someone that is offering to pay someone else over $4,000 for a cow. Absolutely ludicrous in my mind, because again, yes, calves are high, but we're still selling a $1,500 calf. So if you're going to pay 3 times calf price for a cow, you know, that makes it hard to make money. I'll just say that. We can argue about the specifics of that, but there are other opportunities this year that have been available. Last fall was a good one. One could buy bred cows for $1,500. Well, the calf is probably going to be worth that also, and we now know that cull cows since the first of the year are selling at $1.20 a pound. So if that's a 1,200 pound cow at $1.20, and let's say she nets me a little less than that, but so I'm going to make the, you know, round the number to $1,400 for the cow, possibly $1,500 for the calf. Take my feed costs away from that. That gives me the intrinsic value. Well, are cow prices high or are they low? If you spend $4,500 on a cow prices are too high. If you spend $1,500 on a cow prices are not high. But we're often selling the same calf or a calf of a very, you know, within a fairly small amount of variation, right? The cow variation is much, much wider than the calf variation.
So, John, that $4,000 cow,
and it's actually 4,500. But go ahead.
4,500. So, you know, us that are in the sell by world, like some of, I mean, we get it, But sometimes we forget what the conventional or quote conventional way of thinking is. Like remind us, because that person who made that purchase choice, they're not. It might look like they're stupid, but let's just assume that they're not.
No, they're not. And I don't want it to appear like I'm picking on them. That's a great point.
So what is the conventional non-sell buy thinking behind that? Is it like break-even analysis? Like I'm going to get 4 good calves out of her. That's more than the asset price of 4,500.
It's a great question. The biggest thing, there are a number of different ways to evaluate that. And I would say the biggest difference involves a lot of what a guy I used to work with used to call betting on the come. How long are we going to be able to sell calves for $1,500?
Forever.
Some people, yeah,
Always.
Always.
You should hope that is absolutely not true. All right, we'll talk about high prices some other time. But that is an example where they say, okay, I'm buying a factory for $4,500. She's going to pop out $1,500 widgets for the next 6 years. That may or may not be true, but there's a lot of guessing. The problem is where the other problem people run into, Eric, is cow prices get to $3,000 like they are now. Or last spring, it was when we were buying heifer calves and they were $1,800, and steer calves were steer calves were $1,800. Well, is that a high price? Again, we have to go back to our value of gain and look at the intrinsic value to see, yes, that is a lot of money, but is that overpriced or underpriced? We have to have a tool to do that. And conventional sell-by producers and marketers have no real way of doing that, right? They work on patterns and cattle cycles. I mean, there are some real technical guys that do that. But as all of you know, anyone that watches forecasts, whether it's weather, markets, whatever, like they're always wrong. I always start my analysis assumptions with the fact that I am wrong. And the thing I need to find, what makes our analysis different in my mind, what makes my approach to analysis different, is I am taking into account that I have incomplete information. I am taking into account that I am wrong, and there are probabilities associated with being wrong, probably in either direction, right? High or low. And when you take that type of approach to forecasting, while I'll say it's terribly humbling, it also forces you into a mode of thinking that says, okay, how do I get rid of all this error, right? Because in science, what scientists do and what extension economists do is they deal in hypotheticals, and that's awesome. Or they deal in history, and that's awesome too. But it gives you no ability to say, okay, what's going to happen tomorrow? So, for example, take all the hypotheticals that happened leading up to the Ukraine war. There were all kinds of indicators that said you should not, you shouldn't hedge feed about a month before war broke out in Ukraine. And then, of course, as soon as war broke out in Ukraine, there was, looking back, every reason in the world to wish that one had. So I don't know if that answers your question directly, Eric. And I definitely I don't want to pick on anybody here. Like that's not my goal, but I want to make sure we understand why we come to a different place, why we arrive at different answers.
Right. Here's another comment about ratios, right? So I agree with Jordan, ratios are pretty cool. But when we're comparing the factory, when we're comparing the cow to the widget, the calf, we're really comparing 2 different things. I wonder if there's a way to add like another dimension to the ratio to make those 2 units closer. Does that kind of make sense? Because a calf is it's a 1-year widget, right? Yep. Where a cow could be around for a year or 3 years or 4 years, depending on your mindset. I wonder if there's a way to add the dimension of time to these ratios. Just spitballing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. So there are a couple of important comparison ratios. This may be an answer to a different question, but it's similar. I definitely want to be looking at some measure of ROI or ROA or ROE. Okay, so return on asset, equity, or investment, right? I want some measure of that. Then I also want to return to grass. Okay, so a cow eats twice as much as a heifer, right? Or whatever the numbers are, right? We have to have some idea of that. And then we also always want to have return, like a standardized reporting for the time. So as I mentioned, I often annualize those asset turnover numbers. Okay.
Yeah.
If we assume the return on a cow comes over a 2 or 3 year period, we may evaluate that differently. We did some cow trades here over the first of the year that showed very not, we took a very nice annual level return in 100 days. So, Bob Metzger's words, we could have just taken the rest of the year off and been fine. Okay. And it's February. So that's a wonderful opportunity, right? Anytime we have the opportunity to sort of compare those again on an annual basis, I think that helps us. Cash flow goes with those. So we have those sort of three main, estimates of the impact of your asset investment, quantified however you want to, your carrying capacity on your ground, the time that you have involved in this, and the time correlates closely with cash flow. So a lot of real estate people use a year over year, cash on cash, year over year return. And that is a very reasonable place to start. You may, again, go back to the direct to consumer. You may make more money. You may be a lot more profitable, but you probably are reducing your cash flow. What is the cost of that? And things like opportunity interest, whether we're actually paying interest or not, help us normalize that. Does that answer your question?
No, yeah, it does. Yeah.
Okay. There are lots of other things to think about. I'm not advocating that everyone get in the business of switching wildly between enterprises, based on changes in the wind, changes in the market. But we definitely might like take a cow-calf enterprise as an example. Depending on how we do our marketing, we may choose. So, for example, in 15, we chose not to keep heifers explicit. We chose to buy old bred cows because we could sell the heifers for, at that point, $1,400 to $1,600, and we could buy a bred cow for fewer dollars. Most people were selling high dollar calves and using that to invest in expensive cows. I'm a much, and Wally's beaten this into my head over and over again, I'm a much more shorter term look. If I can pick up $200 today and still play tomorrow, I'm bird in the hand is significantly better than bird in the bush. And as a lot of people saw in 2016, if I'm remembering my chronology right, that's the summer that the market crashed. Right now we had a lot of high dollar cows producing fairly low value calves, right? If you remember, it went from like $1,200 a head or $1,600 a head back to $1,200, and then within another year was down to $600 a head. And I don't know how many calves you have to get out of a $3,000 cow to pay that off, but it's some number. You need twins at that point. And most people, interestingly enough, regretted paying too much for the cows. And that was a bit of a mistake because, again, you could pay too much for the cows. You just had to make sure you worked your way out of it correctly and didn't just hang on. But those, the years, and we've had a number of them here recently. You could sell a heifer and buy a cow. Like, and Eric, to your comment, when we look at intrinsic value calculations, that sort of normalizes time also, right? Because I put in the cost of converting her from a heifer to a cow, right? So from a heifer calf to a cow, to a bred cow, I pick up a year, and to a cow with a calf by her side, I'm often picking up another year. And those years have a cost associated with them.
I like your return on grass ratio. I think because that's the common denominator.
Correct.
No matter what
And
class,
often a limiting factor.
everybody eats
Yes.
grass.
Yep.
So,
Now, funny enough, in my current situation, I use that number a lot less. Right? Take Wally as an example. How limited is Wally by grass?
Not very.
Yeah, that's right, because he knows Grant.
there should be a return on grant.
Oh, we don't.
Unless he's smoking grass.
It's not very high, Eric.
Don't say that, Grant. We all know that's not true. Cool. All right. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Are you guys, when you look at your own businesses, are you getting a feel for how complex gross profit is? I talk to people on a
Actually,
regular
wait.
basis. Sorry, go ahead.
Gross, watch your terms. Gross profit or gross product?
I hope I said gross product. Did I mix them
You
up?
said gross profit.
Okay. Well, I'll stick with gross profit because gross profit is incredely complex, in part
Okay.
because it includes gross profit, which is
You just
ridiculous.
added an hour onto this talk.
Now we're not doing that. But again, when I really want you to pay attention in your individual businesses to how the gross product behaves over time, because it is absolutely fascinating. It is very sensitive to changes that you make. It has a lot of upward potential. And again, I feel like it's just this massively underlooked, overlooked, under-inspected metric. We just keep not paying attention to it. And that comes from our fundamental belief that there isn't a lot of profit to be made in this industry. And I can't rail enough about how wrong that is. I meant to do this at the beginning, but if we're all done, I just want to tell you all this week I've been down to a meeting, a board meeting. I'm on the board of an organization called the His Cavy Foundation. Some of you know about His Cavy. It is an organization that helps ranchers and cowboys primarily that have some sort of medical problem. And I am so excited about the direction the foundation is going. We've got some pretty cool targets for the next 20 years of growth. If you know someone, or if you find yourself in a position where you are badly hurt and need help with, medical expenses, finding someone to replace you at the ranch while you're recovering, physical therapy, all that stuff, and especially if you're not covered by workman's comp or insurance, please get on the website, which is hiscavyfoundation. Hiscavyfoundation. I think it's .com, but it might be .org. I better check that next time. Get on there and either make a donation, but if you know somebody that's hurting, fill out an application. You can fill out an application on their behalf. We have had the wonderful blessing of being able to help a pretty nice little number of people. The stats on the website are pretty outdated. But I've had the opportunity to go drop checks off for people that are in a 16, 18, month recovery period. And sort of the ability to do that has been a wonderful blessing to me and obviously great for our family. They put a roping on in Walden every year. If you love the risk of extremely bad winter weather in October, and you like to rope in the wind, we do a pasture roping there. There will be hundreds of people there roping. It's a lot of fun. It's like a 2 or 3 day event. Lots of things going on, big dinner, fantastic fundraising event, great opportunity to meet people. Wally does a sell by marketing school there, a 1-day sell by marketing school there. And then in 2025, we're going to put another roping on in Wairika, Oklahoma. So if you're in the South Plains and want to get down for that, we're partnering with a cowboy church down there to do a pasture roping in March of 2025. So I put that in as a plug. If you need other things in your life, or if you know someone that is injured, or you're looking for a place to donate your excess profits, please look up hiscavyfoundation.org. Awesome. Any other thoughts? Cool. Wonderful to see all of you. I'm honored that you all come. I hope this is useful. I always love to hear feedback. So if you've got more questions that you're too shy to ask, or thoughts, comments, ways we can make these better, I want to hear about them. With that, I'm going to stop recording, if I can figure it out.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate it.
You're very